I'll just tell you a bit about my life. You know, when I was very small, 3 years old, I'd been born in Northampton, in the middle of England, very sort of middle of England, very English town. My parents took me to Cyprus in the Middle East. My father was a civil engineer. He wasn't in the military. He was a civil engineer. And he had a contract to build a power station at Dekilia in Cyprus, just outside Larnaca. And from the fact that it was my father who was going to build the power station, you can logically deduce that we didn't have any electricity. So life was simple. Life was very basic. It was a hot country, but you didn't have a fridge, right? Think about it, because fridges run on electricity. And there wasn't what was called the ice factory down in the town. You could go down and buy big slabs of ice and you would bring them back and put them in the bottom of a safe, you know, a safe in the sense of a box with mesh sides, which you could put all your vegetables and stuff in, and the ice would gradually melt as the day went on. It was a sort of little image of impermanence in a way, that the ice gradually disappeared and evaporated. I loved the ice factory because my mother would sometimes make up a mix, and my father, in the morning, he would go down to the ice factory, pick up the ice, bring it home, and then go to work. And he would take this mix with him, and he would just go, things were very casual, you know. He would go into the ice factory, and he'd just stand this on top of the ice making machine. And then he'd go off to work, and it wouldn't get stolen, it wouldn't get moved. Just ordinary people trusting each other. My father would go to work, he'd come back from work. On the way back, he'd pick up this tin and he'd come home and open it, ice cream. Of course, I loved this. It was wonderful. It's wonderful, especially because on the island at that time, there was no milk. All the ingredients of the ice cream came out of tins, which had to be imported because there were no cows on the island. And this was well before the days of soya milk and all that sort of thing. Anyway, it gives you a little snippet of my childhood, my early childhood. And I remember that time in Cyprus as a kind of idyllic. It was like, for a child, it was a kind of pure land. There was the beach, there was the sea, there was the sunshine. And my parents still loved each other at that time. This made a great difference. Of course, there were defects. I got what we called prickly heat, which is a skin rash that you get that's terribly irritating if you're out in the sun too much. And my mother used to wrap me up in loads of clothes and give me a little hat so that I was looked like a sort of old-fashioned fireman. And I rather hated this, being wrapped up in this way, but it was better than the awful feeling of the prickly heat. But nonetheless, by and large, it was a quite idyllic sort of existence. And another side to it was that much of the time I was on my own. The only other English children on the island were the military, and they were on the military base. So I hardly ever saw them. And the other children were all Cypriot children. Cypriot covered quite a range. I mean, the majority were basically Greek, but there were also Turks, Armenians, Egyptians, all sorts. So this was another sense in which it was a kind of little paradise, because all these different races got on. We were all at school together. We all mixed together. My parents had friends who would come. It was a very social life. The adults would spend a lot of time in each other's houses, and these other houses were from all these different nationalities, and they all got on. When I look back at the Middle East nowadays, I feel so sad, because there has been this terrible separating out, and all these different races, they're all fighting each other, and they're all in sects and groups and militias and this and that, and the trust has gone. And this seems terribly sad. There's a great grief there. As I got a little older, and when I was more like 8 or 9, the situation in Cyprus had deteriorated. The country was still a British colony, but now there was resistance to that. And there were 3 different resistances. There were those people who wanted to unite Cyprus with Greece. There were those people who wanted Cyprus to be an independent country. And there were those people who wanted the whole place to be communist. And these 3 factions not only fought the British, they fought each other. So you had a 4-cornered civil war going on, basically. And I used to go to school, but that meant traveling from your home to the school. You were vulnerable. An English child would make a jolly good, what's it called? Hostage. So by the time came towards the end of my period in Cyprus, I was being taken to school in an armored personnel carrier with a man with a machine gun on the top. And the school itself was surrounded by sandbags and soldiers in emplacements with their nasty weapons and so on, to keep us safe. So I saw this at a very early stage in my life. I saw this transformation from an idyllic situation to a war zone. And I lived through it. Friends of my parents were shot down in the street. My parents were very protective. They tried to keep me safe through all this time. I never knew that my father always carried a gun, for instance. I didn't find that out until later. Things like that, they tried to keep away from me. But he always had a gun in his pocket, apparently, in case he needed it. And of course, there were many incidents in which, fortunately, we were never caught up in quite the incident that George described when his lorry was stopped and they were attacked. But incidents of that kind certainly happened. And many people died during what was called the emergency. Of course, I could go on about the history of Cyprus and its subsequent fate and so on. And of course, it's something that I follow. If I see it in the news, then obviously I read those things because I have this karmic connection. We all have karmic connections with all sorts of things. And this is the scenery of our life. And some of that scenery is beautiful and peaceful and tranquil and assuring. And some of it is violent and oppressive and troublesome and very difficult to cope with. Both of these things are part of the reality of life. And sometimes war gives way to peace. Sometimes peace gives way to war. And sometimes the conditions of peace set up the situation for war. So sometimes the conditions of war create a situation when the peace comes, which is actually better than it was before the war. You know, the end of war is not always going back to how it was before the war. You look at the position of women in Britain before and after the Second World War. Their position was much better and stronger after the war than it was before. Things of that kind. In the period of rebuilding after the catastrophe, well, things are rebuilt. So new methods, new approaches, new possibilities, new structures, new forms, and so on, all become possible. So the devastation of war often creates spaces where good things can happen. So life is like this. There is a kind of cycle of good and bad, destruction, creation, and so on. This is going on all the time. And this has been very much part of my life. And this is the sort of, I've concentrated a little bit so far on what you might call the external structure. But there was also an internal structure, if you like to call it that. Maybe it's not the wrong word, but I can't think of what the right word is. You know, when I was in this very early period and living in this idyllic environment, we had a bungalow and it had a big garden. And because I was alone, though, as I say, hardly any other English children, I spent a lot of time alone. This is relatively unusual. I mean, if you think of your own childhood, probably between the ages of 5 and 10, you probably weren't alone an awful lot. But I was alone a lot. And I spent my time often in the orchard at the back of the house. I got into trouble one day because I hammered a load of nails into one of the trees and it died. In my attempts to create a ladder to climb up this tree. But yeah, you see what a mixture of memories you have. Anyway, I used to sit in this garden sometimes. I would play my games. I would make dens. I would have fantasy games. I'd be the good guy, or I'd be the bad guy, or I'd be the dragon, or and I'd make sailing ships or dens or castles or whatever, and I would play in the garden. And sometimes I would just sit and ponder, think about life. And I think that's when I learned to meditate. That's when I learned to meditate. When I was about 5, I learned to meditate. I'd never read a book on meditation. In fact, at the age of 5, I'd never read a book, full stop, because I didn't really learn to read until I was about 7. I was fairly slow academically. But yeah, I think that's when I learned to meditate. And I would sit and I would ask myself what were, in a sense, you might say, existential questions, like, I wonder what the life of that rock is. You know, there were rocks in my garden. And I knew I was alive, but I didn't really know quite what that meant. And but was the rock alive? I mean, it didn't run in for tea when Mother called the way I did. But maybe it had some sort of life of its own, you know. And it was quite a puzzle to me that my life seemed to stop at my fingertips. That it didn't just sort of go on into the rest of everything. Why was I limited in this way? It seemed unnatural somehow. I think I had some sort of sense that, well, you know, if you take the Buddhist ideas, I seem to have some sort of memory of being otherwise. But anyway, it seemed a puzzle that I was stuck in this body. Why am I just in this body? Why does it stop here? And anyway, I puzzled on these things, and they sort of worked on my mind. And these were my early meditations. like a sort of koan, you might say, trying to come to terms with existence, with I could say that now, you know, I didn't know big words when I was that age, but but that's what it was. I was trying to come to terms with the facticity of being just in this little body, and encountering this rock or this tree, and they were sort of my friends. Though communicating with them wasn't always so easy, but in another sense, I did feel I communicated with them. So all of this was puzzling my little mind, you know, and I would sit on my rock in the garden and look at the other rock. And one day I was looking up at the big tree. There was a big conifer in the garden. And it was like a sort of arrow. You know how conifers are, that sort of pointing shape. It was pointing at the sky, you know. And I was very small and it was very big. And you looked up this tree, and here's this arrow going all the way up to heaven, you know. And the heaven, of course, was very blue in Cyprus, sunshine all the time. And I was sitting there, and I must have gone into some sort of reverie. And I always hesitate to say this, it feels quite embarrassing, but an angel spoke to me. And the angel said that I had something to do in life. And of course I wanted to know what. And he wouldn't tell me. It just said I would know. And I found it.
Discovery Bay.
What's happening?
No, Discovery Bay está ahí detrás.
Can you mute?
Ahí.
Okay, I'll come back. You see, the strangest things can happen. Just out of the blue, something happens and interrupts your flow. This is how life is. So this interrupted my flow, this angelic appearance. I had other numinous experiences, as I would call them nowadays, with my psychological knowledge. But this one particularly stuck in my mind. And it was, again, a sort of koan, as a sort of puzzle, you know, that you will know when the time comes, sort of thing. Anyway, I kept all this very much secret. I sort of sensed that the grown-ups wouldn't understand, you know. And gradually I grew up, and then we came back to England. Well, England seemed like, from having gone from this sort of bright light place, well, in Sustama's image, you know, of the hole in the ground with the bright sunshine shining on one side of the hole, and the other side being in deep shadow. Coming back to England seemed like coming out of the sunshine and going into the shadow. I was suddenly amongst children who didn't understand me, and I didn't understand them. We were on completely different wavelength. When they said they were going a long way, they meant the other side of town. If I said a long way, I meant the next continent. And we just didn't click, you know. And so I felt, in Cyprus I'd been alone, but I never felt lonely or isolated. But when I came back to England, I was in the midst of lots and lots of other children and felt very lonely, very isolated, and you know, completely the opposite. And so I had quite a troubled adolescence, one problem after another. And I suppose during this time also probably there was other external factors, because all my grandparents died during this time, one after another, one of them by suicide. My parents' marriage deteriorated, so there wasn't quite so much affection and goodwill around, though they still cared for me very well. But adolescence was quite a struggle. So I have to say, far from knowing what I would have to do when the time came, I felt myself completely at sea. I had no idea what was going on most of the time. And I just buried myself in my books. And although I'm not the most high intelligence, I managed to do fairly well in all my exams because really, the only safe place, we talked about safe places. Chantikara was talking about where is your safe place last night. My safe place was in my books. Once I had learned to read at about 7 years old, I just became deeply engrossed in books. And I've been a bookworm ever since. I've got several thousand books through in the other end of my my place here. Books have been a great companion and a great solace and refuge. And so I became knowledgeable about certain things, and I had my academic career and so on, and got my various bits of diploma and so on. Yes, place of refuge. So yes, so what's the broad picture I've painted so far? Well, that things go round in cycles, that there are ups and downs, there are many changes. You can be given an assurance that you will know the way, but when it actually arrives, you can feel very lost. And you can feel very surprised by what happens. And suddenly I was sort of lifted out of Cyprus and plonked down back in England. And it was not at all what I was prepared for or what I was used to. And but in the midst of all that chaos of adolescence, I did manage to find one or two good friends. And that again was a sort of refuge. It was a solace. And I always had the sense that perhaps because of that early inspiration, I had a sense of, well, wherever you go, whatever you do, wherever you land up, whatever sort of school you're in, I went to 10 different schools in my time, they each can teach you something. And the thing was to learn whatever it was that was going. You might not see any relevance to it at the time, but one day it might be useful, whether you're learning a foreign language, or you're learning algebra, or you're learning how to cope with the bully in the playground, or whatever it is. Learn what you can, wherever you happen to be. I had very much that sort of ethos, and I suppose I had worked out gradually a sort of philosophy of my own, you might say, which you could also call it a survival strategy. And then adult life came, and it was slightly better than being an adolescent at school, but not a lot. I had a very difficult first marriage, and produced 3 children who are fantastic, but we had a lot of conflict, and things were not at all easy. But in the early part of that period, when my first child had been born, and we were living in considerable poverty, I was at college, and we had the college break in the summer. So we resolved to have a holiday, even though we got hardly any money. We would have a holiday. So my wife and I and the cat, and my wife was pregnant at this time, I think. It was just before the first child. We set off for Cornwall. We got on the train and we went down to Cornwall, and with the cat. I remember we had an argument with the guard on the train about whether we could have the cat actually with us in the compartment. And in the end, we were able to, and we took the cat. And we camped near Mausel, at near Land's End, and went walking and had a nice first day. After we got a little tent, this was all we could. We borrowed the tent, I think. I don't think we could even afford to buy a tent, but we borrowed a tent. And the cat went off to explore, and we went off in different direction to explore, and we had a nice day walking over the moors, and got quite tired. And at the end of the day, we went down to the beach, and the water looked sort of inviting, though the water around Cornwall is quite treacherous. And I'm not a very good swimmer. And you know, I started to swim, and I thought, oh, I'll just swim to that point over there. And it proved to be a lot further away than I had thought. And well, I disappeared under the water and started to drown. And as you see, I was rescued. But at the time, I knew I was dying. And as I was beginning to, once there's a certain threshold, you know, you're struggling to stay afloat, you're struggling to survive. But there's a certain threshold point beyond which you know it's hopeless now. You stop trying to go on living because you know you're now dying. So, and at that time I had the same sense, just like the voice in the childhood. You will know what to do as it unfolds. And I trusted that, just as I trusted it when I was a child. And I think this recurring voice of you will know what to do, even though life seems such chaos and everything seems completely surprising, and you never know what's coming next. Still, somehow, this voice is a refuge for me. It sustains me through all the difficulties. Sometimes I do the most stupid things. Sometimes I have rows with people. Sometimes I get into a mess socially or whatever, politically or whatever. I've had lots of ups and downs in my life. When I was in the Italian class in Italy trying to learn a bit of Italian, one of the exercises they gave us was to think about, was there ever a time when our life was in danger? And the other students were all scratching their heads and wondering if it was the case. But I had a long list, you know, so many times when my life has been in danger one way or another. But something has sustained me, you see. Something has enabled me to go through those times. And it's associated with these experiences. I want to share with you a poem by Pema Chodron. I've got it somewhere. Hold on a minute. I will do this screen share thing and show it to you. Can you see that? Here we are. The truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together and fall apart, and come together again and fall apart again. It's just like that. The healing comes from letting there be room for all this to happen. Room for grief and for relief, for misery and for joy. I think this this is wonderful, wonderful piece by Pema Chodron, who's a great teacher. It's a disciple of Chogyam Trungpa, who was also one of my teachers. And you know, we spend our life trying to solve things, trying to get the answer, trying to know trying to get that sense that we know what we're doing. And so Starmer in her Dharma talk, she talks about how one of the enemies, I can't remember, it was a distant enemy or a close enemy. I think it was a distant enemy. Maybe it's a close one. I don't know. I don't remember. You see what sort of a student I am. Whichever it was, this sense of kind of false certainty that we sort of crave for. We're just foolish beings. Things come together and then they come apart. And then they come together again, and then they fall apart again. And it's just like that. But still there is healing. And in a strange way, there is a kind of, I don't know if you call it healing, perhaps you would. Heal is probably a very old Anglo-Saxon word, I would imagine. It probably has some origin. It's probably related to whole, I guess, or something like that. The whole is made up of all these things, the coming together, the parting, or that's the external, but the internal level, the grief, the relief, the misery, the joy, all of it. And you see, we try and defend ourselves in a way against it because we want this sense of certainty, which is elusive. And we want to get rid of the grief, but we want to get rid of the misery. And so we develop various tricks to sort of anesthetize ourselves. So I think of it like this, we have some psychological strategies, maneuvers that enable us to sort of anesthetize ourselves against the grief and the misery. But of course, anesthetic is undiscriminating. At the same time, we take out the relief and the joy. We take out the positive half when we take out the negative. When you suppress the yin, you suppress the yang at the same time. And that's how we carry on, and very understandable. And when I work as a therapist, I meet people and they tell me their version of the story I've just told you about me. And it always has these same things that came together and came apart, and came together again and then came apart, with grief and relief and misery and joy. And the struggle they have with it, and the particular strategy of anesthesia that they have developed. And I can understand. I fully appreciate why they have been so. The client I had who when she was a child, her mother had a new boyfriend, and the boyfriend and the mother were quarreling, and the mother and boyfriend were living apart, and the little girl who was my client, her mother had set her at the door with a gun and said, if he comes, you shoot him. So this little girl had been sitting there with this pistol in her hands. Well, she never forgot that, and it stayed with her all her life. We all have something, we all have, as we've had in another session a little bit, we had a bit of discussion about trauma. Well, we're all traumatized. Everybody is traumatized. Some have been traumatized this way, some have been traumatized that way. And of course, the saving grace of this is compassion. Is that the more things you've been through, the more you can understand in the next person, because you stand in their shoes. You have a sort of, oh yeah, I know what that's like. Goodness, been there. We're not exactly there, but something analogous enough for me to know what it's like to be in that position. George was showing some of these horrible pictures yesterday, nightmare scenes of life in African prisons and so on. And there was one of a young man being bent over and clearly tortured by, tormented at least by a group of bigger fellas who were all standing around. It just took me straight back to my school days, being in the midst of gangs of others who, at least for that afternoon, maybe they don't even hate you. They're just having a bit of fun making your life totally miserable. For them, it's sport, maybe. But this is how life is. It's how life is. I don't know whether this is a Dharma talk or a confession or just reminiscing, but I'm sharing with you something of my experience, something of how I've got to where I am at the moment. I don't seem to be able to, I'm still sharing, aren't I? Stop sharing. There we are. Yeah, okay, you've all come back again. That's good. So now I'm much older. Is it any different? Well, in a certain sense, not really. Good things happen, bad things happen. Good things happen, Namo Amitabu. Bad things happen, Namo Amitabu. And that's my refuge now, if you like. There's something that transcends all these ups and downs, something that transcends, that's not impermanent. So if everyone around me loves me, or everyone around me hates me, well, obviously, I like it when people love me. And I really don't like it when they all hate me. But still, there is something that that transcends that. I can think of it as a thread running through, or I can think of it like the same way as Pema Chodron does, as creating the space in which all these things can happen anyway. Just as sometimes it's a blue sky and sometimes there's black clouds, and they come and they go and it changes and so on like that. But still there's the sky, and still there's the sun, and still there's the sunlight, even when it's hidden by the dark cloud. It comes and it goes. And when you've been through that enough times, then you know that even when the night is pitch black and the sky is completely covered in thunderous clouds, still the sun is still there, even though you can't see it at that time. So maybe I've said enough. Yeah, I've been talking for about 50 minutes or so. I should stop. I think you get the general message that I'm trying to put across. And we can have a little time for questions, and we're not really running very tightly to the timetable today. So don't worry about it. Things will happen. Everything will happen in due course. It's just another example. You plan things, you have a timetable. Sometimes it works spot on. Sometimes it doesn't work at all. That's life. Don't shed, there will be grief, there will be joy, there will be relief and so on. But don't exaggerate it. There's no need. There's a quantity of grief for each misfortune, but you don't have to overdo it. Namo Amitabu. Thank you very much. I'm going to go back to gallery view so I can see you all, not just some of you. Well, not quite all of you, because there's two screens. open to any comments or questions or anything you'd like to share. We've all got lives, you know. Namo Amidama. Conrad, did you want to say something? You're mute.
I've unmuted myself, so I suppose I should. I think I was just particularly caught by your comment about perhaps the empathy, the value of the bad times, and I don't think I've got any more to say than that. That perhaps those bad times, the sort of the worst times, can be the ones where you open the most. And whilst joyful times, obviously, we want and we like, and we do feel a sense of compassion for others who are experiencing joy and so on. Perhaps those really bad times also give us, I don't know, a real sense of depth, without which we would be somehow a little bit two-dimensional.
Yeah.
And to be thankful for bad times is something we don't often do in a culture, but it's quite important in a way.
Yeah, that's right. And we have a kind of quite an ethos of how you're supposed to be the in command of your life. But things happen. You need a T-shirt, you know, with dukkha happens.
Would the other side say sukha happens too?
Would the other side say dukkha happens?
The other side would say sukha happens?
No, not really. I think it would have to say I don't know, something like dukkha's coming on the front and dukkha was here on the back.
Maybe keep chanting and carry on.
That's right. Yeah. That sort of these things pass through, you know. They come in one side, they go out the other. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. But as Conrad's just said, you know, there is always two sides to everything. My mother would always say every cloud has a silver lining. And there's an English expression, it's an ill wind that blows nobody any good. Somebody always benefits, whatever happens. And even the most awful things, there's always two sides to it. And even when you encounter somebody who objectively is a real villain, there's love in there somewhere. And in a way, everything is love fundamentally. You know, it might be, you might pour that love into an ideal that actually is a complete delusion, like the superiority of your race, say. That's a common one. That's a kind of love still. It's a love for the people that you regard as your people. And of course, we all draw a line somewhere, you know. I mean, some people eat animals and some people don't. For the ones who don't, they think, well, there's terrible people who eat animals. People who do eat animals, they're just nourishing their own kind. They're nourishing themselves and their children and their friends by eating those animals. You know, the fox who kills the chicken is looking after its young. So even that slaughter, you know, you go out to the chicken hut in the morning and there's feathers everywhere and blood. In a certain level, that was still an act of love because the fox was feeding its children.
I empathized a lot with what you said about, as a child, thinking that the world ends at your fingertips, because that sense of there is me, and that is sort of all that really matters, and there's something out there beyond my skin and my fingertips. Alan Watts and Guy Claxton write brilliantly, I think, about that illusion that what really matters finishes at the edge of your skin. Whereas, of course, your skin is a constant gate where, you know, the universe comes through and plays.
Yes,
But
well,
the illusion
yes,
is powerful.
exactly. And I didn't feel it was all that mattered, you see. But I did feel this huge frustration that I couldn't really get the full sense of what it was to be the rock. The rock's life remained a kind of mystery to me. And I was constantly trying to burrow into what is the life of that rock, or what is the life of that tree? And lives are so different, you know. I mean, I see it here, just around the countryside, around my house. So many different forms of life, and they're each living their life. And the walnut tree out there, I mean, it lives on a totally different time scale to me. And sometimes you see fights between two different species, perhaps a reptile and a mammal. And you think, well, this is such an asymmetric piece of warfare, as it were. They're just totally different animals with no real understanding of each other. Even when we kept, I had two pets, one was a cat and one was a rabbit. They obviously had completely different views of the universe. It's all mystery, you know. I'd really like to know what the world looks like for the rabbit. But I was walking in the dunes once near Dunkirk. I was going to cross to England, and in my usual Bombu way, I'd mistaken the date and arrived a day early for the ferry. So I slept in the car for the night. But while the weather was still light, I went walking in the dunes. And the dunes were full of rabbit holes. And I was walking, and there was a rabbit hole. And just as I got there, I obviously didn't have a very heavy footfall or whatever. A rabbit came out the hole just as we both arrived at the hole at the same time. A rabbit popped out and I arrived. So there we were, face to face. And for a moment, I understood the rabbit. I saw that I intuited the whole mental process of the rabbit just for a moment, as it startled and saw what was going on and made sense of the situation, and then disappeared backwards down the rabbit hole, which actually is extremely difficult for a rabbit to do. Rabbits are very much constructed to move forwards. But just a moment of connection. And we have these moments of connection with other life, have these moments of connection with one another. But a lot of the time, life is big mystery.
Yeah, Dharmavidya, Namo Amitabu. Just a few words. It's quite interesting to hear your life story, especially when you are 5 years old, at the age of 5 years, and even you didn't know what's a Buddhism or meditation or etc. You know, all these things, either mindfulness, or because just you are a child. But still, you sat for meditation, you know, like Dhyana, sit quietly. And, you know, it makes me a little bit sense how the seed, Buddha seed, maybe we can say, you know, a seed came in your mind or in your body. I think that time at the age of 5, unknowingly, but you didn't recognize it, but that's a Buddha seed. But unknowingly, it's entered in your body at the age of 5 years.
Mm.
And that seed leads up to here now. And, so the Bodhisattva, selected you at the time of age. And, that's what I imagining hearing all your story. It's like your story, like a graphic, like a graphic on the map going up and down and up and, some. And and reading that your life story and that poem, it's a similar, coming close, relevant. Uh, it's quite interesting, how that poem connected with your life.
Mm.
Yeah, quite. And especially you said, the sun is always is there. And the clouds comes, sometimes it's a blue sky we can see, and, silver clouds or, dark clouds, whatever, it comes and goes. But the, sun is always is there, the blue sky.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm observing of your life, how. And another thing, and since all this 1 month, I have been listening of your previous retreat, both retreats, like 4 years ago or some years ago. So I have been listening them some talks, how you are, though you have many issues, but still your commitment and your issues, and cheerfully, you are smiling, giving lots of joyful to others. And now practically, now I am experiencing, I'm taking that experience. Yeah. So pleased, thank you. Namo Amitabh. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, sometimes people say to me, how did you find faith? And I tend to say, well, I'm not sure I ever did find faith. I think it must always have been there. I think it's more a case of I didn't lose faith. I think maybe, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what your lives are, but I suspect we all have faith to begin with. And then various things come along, all these ups and downs, and we don't even lose it. We just bury it, or we attach it to this and that. And the things that we attach it to are what Buddhists would call false refuge. And so we don't stay in touch with true refuge. And of course, as a Buddhist, I can now put doctrinal formulae around what is a true refuge. But you're quite right, at that age, I'd never heard of Buddhism. I'd never heard of any of those words. But still, that was true refuge. It's deeper, it's more instinctive than that. And I think it's very nice that we have this Buddhist religion and we have some words. And so it enables us to talk about it and so on. But I don't think that these are the only words or the only way one could talk about it. And certainly not the only way one can experience it, because I'm sure, there must have been some child sitting in the Aztec civilization in South America who had some experience of this kind, completely cut off from all these other civilizations. So I think my sense of religion is of something universal, something fundamental, profound, archetypal, whatever you say, like, which finds expression in different ways. And I think Buddhism and the Pure Land style of Buddhism and so on, I think it's quite a good way of expressing it. And I mean, just recently, this terminology of global Sangha has popped up, sort of out of nowhere, and it's quite a good way of expressing it. That's all. If it's this good way of expressing it, well, let's have it. But let's not get too attached to anything, because things come together and then they fall apart and then they come together again. And when they come together again, they come together in some new constellation. It's like turning a kaleidoscope, and actually each turn may feel like a rupture, but the new pattern is also beautiful. And so it goes on.
on that theme, in Africa, one of the doctors doing palliative care was talking. I asked him why he did the work, and he said on hearing voices that his younger sister died, and that hurt him very much. And he was walking in the forest, and he absolutely clearly heard her voice saying to him, I've closed my eyes so that you may open yours. And he then decided to do the work he did.
Mm. Anyone else like to comment or question or share something?
I don't know if you can hear me or see me, because I seem to be in the dark. Yes, the screen's gone bright.
Yes, you're in the deep shadow, Joan.
Yeah, I muted the screen in the break, and it won't seem to come back again.
Don't worry, I
So-
can hear your voice very clearly.
Oh, good, good. I just wanted to ask a question about dukkha and sukha,
Yes.
because I was thinking, from my experience with my brother, and I had that strong feeling that because he was so ill, there was dukkha, but then there was sukha as well, as like held in this different place. And then later on, I had an experience, and when I was coming back from the Buddhist house in Narborough on a train, I was sitting there, and everything seemed to be just so beautiful. It was too beautiful, and the, you know, but it was the truth. It was the reality. But then I started, and I often felt this, the grief of that, the grief of knowing it's there, but not many people see it. It's too hard to bear sometimes.
Yeah.
Is that all they have to do is to turn towards it and see it?
Yeah.
And that feels to me like it's almost like you've been stabbed in the heart. It feels so terrible, like a big grief. And the dukkha feels like that, but the sukha feels like that as well, because you know it's always there, but many don't see it. And to me, it's like when you said many times to me about you've got a diamond in the hem of your clothes. So it's there, but people don't realise it. They don't notice it until they feel the lump in their head, in the hem of their clothes. And I just think, I don't feel as grief struck as I used to about that. But it's just really, to me, it's really terribly sad to know that it's always there, and it's always going to be there. But it's sad that there's a waste. And I think you said to me once in an email that a life without a life without the Nimbutsu is a waste of a life. And I think, you know, and that's really, really sad, really. That. But then, after being on this retreat, I can see that there's many people that know the truth, have faith. So that fills me with more hope, more faith, you know, to know that there's many good people out there that already know this and that can spread this or transmit it. You know, so because without that, and without the knowledge that there's other people there, you know, and without the Sangha, you know, it's too sad then. I feel, you know, like people I'm meeting, a lot of them, you know, I think, well, and I used to get frustrated with people thinking, well, it's out there, so how come you don't know it? Because I can see it. not clearly because it comes and goes, but I know it's there, and then I forget, and then I know it's there again. But and I was thinking, the question I was going to ask, does because like with my brother, there was dukkha and it was terribly sad, but then they seem to flip over like a coin into sukha.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking the other day, you know, they go together, but then because the fact that sukha and that sukha exists, does that mean there's always dukkha there as well? That it's the same side of the coin and they flip over. And I was wondering what our position was, because a long while ago you were saying that something about we're poised between the ideal and the actual, and it's a tension between those two, the ideal and the actual, and the ideal and the actual. And I was just wondering, because I'd forgotten about that, that we're poised between. Is that the position of knowing that there's this dukkha and sukha, or is that a leader's position?
Oh, well, goodness, that's a whole Dharma talk, Jaya. That's wonderful. There's so many things there. Yeah, there is dukkha and there is sukha, and you know they say the depth of the enlightenment is commensurate with the depth of the doubt. The dukkha and the sukha go together. But also at the end you talked about the ideal and the actual, and the actual is sometimes dukkha and sometimes sukha. But even just like in the yin-yang diagram, you know, the white half has a black dot in it and the black half has a white dot in it. There is always a silver lining to the cloud, and there is always some shadow to the brightness. When you go into the brightness, there is always a shadow. So they are inextricably muddled up together. And you need some faith that carries you through, because sometimes there are many faithful people around you, and that of course is wonderful, of course. But sometimes you're alone. Sometimes nobody understands. Sometimes you're the only person on the island. It's at times like that that you need a refuge that is not dependent on impermanent compounded things, which of course includes all the other people as well as everything else. You need a refuge that goes beyond all that. You know, I'm saying this with a sort of general benefit, because I know from experience that Jayata well has that refuge, and it's carried her through some really difficult times, and not to mention the sort of ongoing difficulty of chronic illness. Yeah, this is how it is. And it's wonderful when we come together as a Sangha. But even Sanghas, you know, they come together and they come apart and they come together again. They come together in new constellations. And the Dharma teachings, you know, Dharma teaching in the world, the ideal, the source, is what that 5-year-old child that I was sensed sitting on a rock in the garden. But in practice in the world, it is teachings and doctrines, and 5 of this and 4 of that and 37 of the other, and you can learn it in class. And but all this can change, because this is just wrapping on the gift, as it were. It's useful, it's good, and it's very helpful that we have some sort of system and the props, if you like, of ritual and doctrine and teaching and formulas and 5 precepts and so on, very useful. 37 factors of enlightenment, wonderful. Eightfold path, very good. These are all supports. But at the age of 5, I had never heard of any of these. But it's still the same thing. The truth of the Buddha is not limited to, not defined in the sense of boxed up by these teachings, by these doctrines, even though the doctrines are extremely helpful. In Buddhism, we say they are fingers pointing at the moon. You know, they're finger pointing at the moon. Don't think the finger is the moon. The moon is something way, way beyond the finger. It is absolutely fundamental essence of life. And it manifests in the actual. And the actual is endlessly changing. Sometimes good, sometimes horrible, sometimes together, sometimes alone. True religion, the essence, gives one a refuge, a vehicle, if you like, a safe way through. If the whole universe is on fire, I will pass through that fire to hear this Dharma. This is what it says in the larger sutra.